Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the Northwest Energy Coalition's webinar on the Northwest Power and Conservation Council draft 2021 plan. If you could, my name is Nancy Hirsch. I use she, her pronouns. I am based in Seattle. On the historic lands of the Duwamish and Coast Salish tribes, and I acknowledge their inherent right to these lands and encourage you to do the same in the community where you are. So if you could put in the chat your name, pronouns, perhaps the tribes that whose lands you sit on, and your organization, that would be great. We're not going to be able to go through introductions for everyone. So we want to make this an active and engaged conversation. Lauren is going to present kind of what we know about the draft power plan and the context, and we encourage you to be active in the chat, but try and focus your chat conversations on the topics that we are talking about today, and make sure that you remain respectful of both Lauren and others who speak, as well as any other questions put forward by any of our participants. I won't necessarily walk through who we are. You can read that on the screen, but I will say that the coalition was founded in 1981 after a group of organizations helped members of Congress draft the Northwest Power Act, which was passed in 1980. And as we were being founded in 1980, 81, 82, we wrote a draft model power plan for the region with our colleagues at the Natural Resources Defense Council and other allies in the community. And we put out a marker for the council when they were developing their first power plan with a model plan. And over the intervening 38 years, we have continued to engage with the Power Council and watchdog the development of the 5-year regional plans. And here we are now. This is the 8th power plan, and we are continuing to watchdog and monitor and engage the community in providing guidance to the council members. So it's good to remind ourselves of that thread that goes from the early 80s when the council was first established and regional planning came into existence in the region to today. That's why your participation is really important.
So Nancy, I can take it.
Yep, and okay. So then I want to pass it off to Lauren McCloy, who is the policy director for the Northwest Energy Coalition, and she will take it from here. And then I will be in the role of kind of monitoring the chat and for questions when we get to the points where we're going to pause and take questions.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. As Nancy mentioned, my name is Lauren McCloy. I'm the policy director here at the Northwest Energy Coalition. We're going to go through a relatively short PowerPoint today, and then we do have time at the end for questions. But I've also asked folks to interrupt me if it seems like we're getting, to a point where it would be good to have some substantive discussion. So thanks for being here, and we're going to talk about the 2021 draft power plan. So the power plan emerged, as Nancy mentioned, out of the passage of the Pacific Northwest Electric Power Planning and Conservation Act of 1980, otherwise known as the Northwest Power Act. And the act's, the purpose of the act was to address the allocation of benefits from the federal hydropower system. One of the things that it did was establish a regional planning body representing the 4 Northwest states, and tasked the council with developing a regional power plan and fish and wildlife program. Notably, the act puts energy efficiency and conservation first as the priority resource for the region, and it requires the Bonneville Power Administration, or BPA, to follow the power plan and to address fish and wildlife restoration by implementing the Fish and Wildlife Program. And for the first time, the Act also required BPA to conduct formal consultation with tribal nations and other stakeholders. So what is the power plan? The plan is updated by the council every 5 years, and it provides a 20-year forecast of demand for the region and outlines a long-term resource strategy, which serves as a guide for resource planning in the region. The plan also focuses on a 6-year action plan period where it sets specific targets for energy efficiency, adopts what's called a model conservation standard, and identifies other areas of work for the council and BPA. Why is it important? The plan is important for really 2 primary reasons. First, because it guides BPA's resource decisions, especially for energy efficiency, but it also informs hydropower system operations and long-term resource needs for BPA and its customers, primarily public utilities in the region. And secondly, it serves as a resource for states, regulators, and private utilities in the region who rely on the council's modeling and data about the Northwest Power System to inform policy and develop their own resource plans. For example, Washington's Energy Independence Act requires utilities to use the latest version of the Northwest Power Plan to develop their energy efficiency targets. And the model conservation standard adopted by the council is widely used by utilities in the region and the council's advisory committees, such as the Regional Technical Forum. So we're here to talk because we are in the public comment period on the draft plan, which is really a critical part of the process, not only because it serves to fulfill the council's purpose to provide for the participation and consultations of the states, local governments, consumers, and the public, but also because it helps the council gauge whether the plan as proposed will address the region's needs. So that's what we're going to talk about today. The council was formed by an interstate compact between the 4 Northwest states in 1981, and it consists of 8 members who are appointed by the governors of the states, one each representing power issues and one representing fish and wildlife issues. So if you want to know more about who the council members are, you can go on the council website and read their bios. The chair is currently Richard Devlin, who was appointed by Oregon Governor Kate Brown. And the vice chair is currently Guy Norman, who is the Fish and Wildlife representative for Washington State. But you can see who all of them are on the website if you want more information. The Bonneville Power Administration, as I think most of you are probably aware, is a federal power marketing agency which markets the power from the federal hydropower system, as well as several private power plants and the Columbia Generating Station. And it also owns and operates the largest high voltage transmission system in the region. Overall, BPA supplies about 1/3 of the region's electricity, and then its governance is overseen by an administrator selected by the U.S. Department of Energy. And this year, John Hairston, a 3-decade veteran of the agency, was selected as administrator. So what do you need to know about the 2021 draft power plan? As Nancy mentioned, this is the 8th plan. And it comes at a critical time for the region when we're going to need solutions now that will put us on a pathway to transform the electricity system over the next 20 years. We've identified kind of what we think are 4 key drivers for this plan. The first is that it must provide a solution for replacing the energy and capacity services from retiring coal plants while maintaining reliability and affordability. The second is that Oregon and Washington have adopted aggressive economy-wide greenhouse gas reduction goals and legislation to implement those goals, which will require widespread deployment of clean energy and increase electric load due to electrification of transportation and buildings. Thirdly, we're starting to see more extreme weather events, including droughts, wildfires, and heat waves. These are becoming more frequent in the Pacific Northwest, and this puts additional stress on the power system. And then finally, changes to the hydropower system operations are necessary in order to recover declining salmon populations in the region. So these are all key drivers of what we think need to be addressed in the 2021 plan. The draft includes some notable progress on renewable energy, understanding the impacts of climate change and incorporating equity considerations into power planning. The council has proposed about 3,500 megawatts of renewable energy for the region, mostly represented by solar and wind during the action plan period. And this is notable because it's the largest ever build out of renewable energy ever included in the plan. So just want to make sure that folks are aware of the relevance of that part of the plan. And it also takes, the first steps to incorporate an equity lens on regional electric system planning through its development of the power plan, and in particular discussions in a systems integration forum on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Earlier this year, the council identified a gap in equity data and is recommending that the region convene a series of workshops to investigate equity broadly and to try to come to some next steps on how to incorporate equity into regional power planning. The draft plan also, for the first time, adopts a climate adjusted baseline. And the council did a lot of work to develop this part of the plan. They consulted with climate scientists to incorporate elements of 3 different climate models and downscale them to the Northwest. And the results show that climate change has already started to shift monthly Northwest hydropower and increase peak demand in the region, with an overall shift towards summer peaks and more extreme hot and cold weather events. So this climate adjusted baseline is really notable because we think it provides an important resource that will help inform the rest of the utility integrated resource planning in the region. And it also adopts a much more kind of forward-looking approach to planning, where we know that the needs of the system now and how the system has operated over the last 80 years is not going to be what we're going to see in the future. And so this is a really important innovation. However, we do have some concerns about the resource strategy that's proposed in this plan. We're especially concerned about the diminished role the council proposes for energy efficiency during the action plan period. For the first time, the council has adopted a range instead of a point target for regional energy efficiency acquisition, and the low end of the range, 750 average megawatts, essentially cuts the energy efficiency target in half, the 7th plan. The high end of the range, which is 1,000 average megawatts, is lower than the 1,400 average megawatt target that was in the 7th plan, but at least it maintains that trajectory of current budgets. The council is also proposing to reduce BPA's share of the regional target, proposing that Bonneville acquire between 270 and 360 average megawatts of energy efficiency by the end of 2027. This is about 36% of the regional target compared to 42%, which has been BPA's share historically. So we have a lot of concerns about the reduction in Bonneville's obligation under this draft plan. And, we really think that this is a bad idea for all the reasons we've identified on the previous slide, and it will be the primary focus of our engagement during the public comment period. This chart shows that the Northwest is already on track to meet the high end of the energy efficiency target proposed by the council. And so reducing the target would send a signal to utilities in Bonneville to actually decrease budgets. BPA's preliminary findings from its own conservation potential assessment are also showing, more EE potential than what the council is showing in the action plan period. So we do have significant concerns that adopting this low target will have significant impacts on energy efficiency programs in the near term. There we go. Okay. We're also concerned about the low level of demand response and the lack of energy storage represented in the resource strategy. The low target for demand response conflicts with analysis that was conducted by the council's demand response advisory committee, which found significantly more demand response potential. And while the draft plan includes a soft recommendation that the region look at energy storage, the lack of energy storage in the resource strategy, particularly energy storage paired with renewables in hybrid applications, is a notable shortcoming of the plan, and something which doesn't actually seem to line up with what we're seeing in utility IRPs and RFPs in the region. The council did include a pathways to decarbonization scenario in the draft plan. Oh, I'm sorry, that's this slide. Okay, there we go, back on track. And in general, we feel that the resource strategy represented by this scenario is more balanced, as it includes more energy efficiency, demand response, energy storage, and renewable energy. However, the council did not take the next step once that analysis was complete of incorporating the findings from the scenario into the resource strategy. And, we think this makes it, it inappropriately kind of limits the relevance of the plan, particularly for Washington and Oregon, where those states have already adopted aggressive greenhouse gas reduction targets and are implementing new legislation that's not reflected in the draft power plan. So now is the time to let the council know that, basically this draft, we simply don't think it cuts muster as written. We're encouraging our members and allies to weigh in with a message focused on, number one, staying the course on energy efficiency. It's very clear from all of the decarbonization modeling that energy efficiency will continue to have a role. And therefore, now is not the time to back off our commitment on energy efficiency. And we think the councils should stay the course. Secondly, we want to make sure that the plan continues BPA's leadership role in the region in providing energy efficiency and making sure that the benefits of the federal hydropower system are experienced equitably in the region, especially in rural communities. We are encouraging the council to incorporate other clean energy technologies besides solar and wind, especially demand response, energy storage, and storage plus renewable energy. And then finally, recognizing the role of customer side resources, including distributed generation and electrification in meeting aggressive decarbonization goals in Washington and Oregon. The council will be hosting 4 remote public comment hearings on the draft. They've already hosted one in Montana. And we strongly encourage people to show up to one or more of these hearings if you can. There has not been a lot of public participation in the process so far. And it's really important for the council to hear from the public directly at this time. Not only does this help to emphasize the importance of the council's public consultation obligation under the law, but it also helps to emphasize that the council is a public entity whose work is accountable to the public. So you don't have to be a resident of the host state to participate in any of the meetings. it seems like in some of the meetings, they are prioritizing local participation by letting those folks who are residents of the host states speak first. So I'll show you how to sign up for the hearing, and you'll see where you can say whether you're a resident of the host state. As always, if you plan to participate, please be respectful of the council members and plan to limit your comments to 2 to 3 minutes. It's hard not to want to dive into the weeds on this stuff, but when you only have, 2 to 3 minutes to get your message across, it's important to stay focused on what you think they need to hear. So to sign up for a public comment hearing, you can click here in this link. And you just put in the hearing date that you want to participate in. As you can see, these are the remaining public comment hearing dates. And you say whether you live in the state shown or not, and then you fill in your information. I do just want to show how this works. And you should get a confirmation letting you know that your name has been added to the list of presenters for the public hearing. It's nice because you can also, during the hearing, you can click on this link and you can actually see the order of commenters. So if you're coming up or not, sort of what the order of commenters will be, and they'll just call on you when it's your turn to testify and you unmute yourself to speak. So you should also receive an email confirming that you've signed up for the hearing, and if not, there is a contact for assistance. And then finally,
Lauren, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is
Go
Fred.
ahead, Fred.
So yeah, here I am in the commentator box. So one thing we've heard from council staff, and Lauren could maybe say more about this, is the order of the list may shift depending on what the council members want to do in that given hearing. In the Montana hearing, they did shift the order somewhat. We've heard they may for Idaho. We don't think so for Washington and Oregon, meaning, first, whoever's first, the first come, first serve, basically. But really, it's the council prerogative, and let Lauren say more about that.
And Fred, are you saying that they'll shift it because they see a bunch of, say they have some utilities or local farmers who are on the list, they'll move them forward to the front? Is that what you're saying?
It wasn't entirely clear what was happening in the Montana hearing, but it was definitely the case that there was some shifting in the list order. I just point this out, and we can talk about, the background on this, that it may mean you have to be prepared to speak when you weren't really, you're thinking ahead. Well, I've, 6 people ahead of me. Maybe they'll put more people in front of you, or maybe you'll be pushed up. I don't really know for sure. And as I say, and Lauren can say more because she had the direct contact with council staff, it may not be the same for each of the hearings.
Yeah, and it seems like they are certainly leaving that up to the chair of the hearing. So, it's kind of up to them, to their discretion, who they want to call on when. But we did see during the Montana hearing, a couple of folks that weren't signed up, but then signed up during the hearing, got kind of kicked to the front of the list. So just want to flag that for folks. It's not 100% clear how that's working. And then I just want to mention too, if you can't attend any of the public comment hearings on the draft, you also have the option of providing public comment at the end of a regular council meeting. Those are, listed here, October 12th through 13th and November 16th through 17th. But just know that if you choose that option, you're going to have to wait until the end of the meeting, and it's not always clear what time that's going to happen. So we encourage folks to participate in the public comment hearings as scheduled.
One more thing to note, that these meetings are scheduled for 2 hours, and a couple of things about that. One is they will hold the meeting open for the full 2 hours, and Montana ended a little, the speaker list ended before that, and the council has a practice of keeping the hearing open. So if you happen to arrive late for other reasons, you could still speak. And the other thing I'm not sure about, though, is if there's a list that's considerably longer than will fit into 2 hours, how the council will handle that, I don't know.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see if you know, if they have more folks show up, then they can actually fit into the 2-hour time block. You know, hopefully they would hold the hearing open so that everybody who is in attendance can speak. And then finally, you know, you can also submit written comments on the draft plan. This is through November 19th. And to submit written comments, you can either click here and it'll bring up a comment form on the council website, or you can send an email to comments@northwestcouncil.org. We will be submitting written comments on behalf of the coalition, and we'll also be supporting members and allies with a sign-on letter later once we kind of get through these initial public comment hearings. However, we would encourage folks to submit their own written comments. You know, it's important that the council continue to hear from a variety of voices. So to access the written comment form, you just go here to the council's website, fill out your organization, affiliation, name, email, and you can either paste your comments into this form or attach a file. It's pretty straightforward. So to review the draft plan and supporting materials, you can go to the council's website, and after the call, we'll also be providing this PowerPoint for your reference and talking points for you to consider incorporating into your public comment. And that is the end of our presentation. Happy to answer any questions and have discussion.
So you can, thank you, Lauren. Excellent presentation of a lot of in-depth material. So Fred and Lauren have been deep in it for the last few months. If you want to ask a question, maybe raise your hand in the reactions bullet at the bottom of your screen. Sometimes at the top of your screen, you hit on that and it says raise your hand. Or you can put something in the chat. Just throw your question or unmute yourself and speak up.
I guess I'll speak up first. First of all, this is Jim Parrish Anderson. I've retired officially from the energy efficiency business. I started 40 years ago at the start of the Power Act. I'm very much involved, and I've started a issue paper series called Electric Equity. And I just have some ideas. First of all, I want to commend you for convening this group. It's really great to get people agreeing and talking and kind of developing some sense of unanimity going forward and engaging on this. I really appreciate that. One thing that I'd like, a couple of things, don't want to take a lot of time. On the equity side, which is what I focus on, I do commend them that towards the end of this document, they do talk about trying to get an equity series going, and they're really kind of starting out how we're kind of in the definition stage and be running some workshops and so on. I mean, people are early on in thinking about this, and I understand that. One thing that I would mention is that in terms of equity, and I have a paper on this I can share with people, a paper I wrote. There's a bias against actually the ratepayer. There's a bias towards homeowners against ratepayers. Two things happen as a result of that. I think that the potential savings from rented buildings is probably underestimated. And also, there's a long history of really working against customers, ratepayers who don't own homes. And those are disproportionately people of color. Again, I've written a paper about that. I'll be happy to share that with folks. I think it's really important when we think about what could be different is to also understand we can make recommendations on policy changes at the federal policy level that are outside of this plan. If you look at the makeup of the committees and their charge of the different committees in forming this plan, each one of them has the option of suggesting new federal policies and new federal regulations. It's in the charge of each of the committees that commented and put this plan together. So I just encourage people to think outside the box. There's things that maybe can't happen in this plan, but could really change the scope of what this plan is meant to do. So those are my comments for now.
Thank you for that. And yeah, if you want to share that paper, I'm happy to send it around.
Great, thank you.
And Lauren, can you see Michaela's question here? Can we say more about the relationship between the Power Council, utility commissions, utilities, state clean energy goals? How does it all fit together? I think really is the key question there.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I will say a little bit about this, and then I'll also ask Fred to weigh in. The council's plan historically has, you know, in some ways it doesn't drive the outcome of utility plans in the region, but it does provide important, you know, methodological and kind of foundational modeling that gets used in utility integrated resource planning. So, you know, for example, we would expect coming out of this plan that the climate adjusted baseline becomes kind of a touchstone for utility planning and commissions. You know, we'll start to kind of get familiar with what that will look like. And then also the resource adequacy assessment that the council conducted, you know, is sort of an addition to various other resource adequacy studies in the region. So kind of adding to that, that institutional knowledge on resource adequacy in the region. For Washington specifically, there's also a very important link between the council's conservation potential assessment methodology and its cost effectiveness criteria and the utility implementation of the Energy Independence Act, where the state law actually requires the Washington utilities to use the most recently published version of the council's plan to inform their own conservation potential assessments and therefore their own conservation programs and budgets. So that's a more, you know, I think direct link between the work of the council and the actual utility plans. And then, you know, I think utility commissions, governor's offices, state energy offices, you know, rely on the council's analysis in a number of ways to help inform, you know, their own policy design and implementation. So those are kind of the three areas that I would highlight. Fred, is there anything you wanted to add?
Well, a little bit more about the council, the structure of it. And this was the result of a pretty delicate political compromise because it put this, it's a state, it's actually not a federal agency. Technically, it's a compact of states that's authorized, I don't even know if that's the right word, is set up by the Northwest Power Act, required each state to pass an enabling law, and each state appoints its own members. The council does have some interaction with federal things that follows, but is not directly under the Federal Advisory Committee Act, for example. And, you know, there's a lot more complexities to it. But the important thing to focus on is it is a creature of the states. And the voting power on the council, 2 members for each state, was a compromise itself. An early version of the Power Act, you know, when it was in Congress, proposed that it would be, you know, something based on population. Well, Washington would have had, you know, 4 votes, and Oregon would have had 2, and Idaho and Montana would have 1 each. Well, each of those state senators would not have that, you know, those states, Idaho and Montana, they were not interested, you know, they weren't going to go for that. So the council has 8 votes, and the act requires that a decision like adoption of the plan has to either pass by 5, including 1 from each state, or 6, any 6. So this adds another little complexity to the state balance on the council that's relevant to this plan.
Thanks, Fred.
Okay, we also have a question from Susan about energy storage and providing some examples of what we mean by energy storage, in particular concerns with pumped hydro storage, and whether we're recommending any particular projects or not, because some projects have more environmental and cultural impacts than others. How are we handling that?
Yeah, so I would say we certainly would stop short of recommending any specific projects for inclusion in the plan. It's more about the types of resources and how they're optimized together to make a clean and reliable and flexible resource strategy. For storage, the primary thing that I think we would see as a shortcoming in this plan is just the lack of a serious consideration of what we call storage and renewable hybrid resources. So, solar paired with batteries, wind paired with batteries. A lot of these projects are starting to show benefits that look a lot like, clean capacity resources and can actually provide significant benefits to the grid. And so it's sort of, I think what we see as a big gap in the resource strategy here is that, okay, well, why aren't you're building out all of this solar and wind, but why aren't you also providing the storage capacity in order to kind of manage and integrate it a little bit better? I don't know, Fred, anything
Well,
else you
one
want to
thing I
add?
can add is one of the advantages of the council all along has been they do very transparent public process, and they rely on public data and not proprietary data by and large. And they are very thorough about assessing all the different kinds of resources, whether it's, generation, supply, demand side, or storage, which can be on either side. And on the storage, there are many categories, but the two main ones are batteries, like lithium ion batteries, and then of course pumped hydro, which has been around for a long time. And there are other, types of storage as well, but those are the primary ones. In the councils, you can go into the council's documentation, the files that they've got online, and find lots and lots of information about all the different resources. Storage comes under the aegis of the Generation Resources Advisory Committee. So if you look at that set of pages, you can find lots of info about different kinds of storage. They've had presentations. I'm a member of that committee, and anybody can be anybody can participate in the advisory committees. You have to apply to be a formal member, but it doesn't make that much difference. But the GRAC, as we call it, has had presentations by a lot of the pump storage proponents in the region, including that one. So there's materials about that project and other pump storage projects in the council material.
Thank you both for that. We have two questions from Mitch and Heather about the council's statements about Lower Snake Dam removal and their lack of kind of authority or analysis, not pursuing analysis in this plan. They have in the past. Do you, Fred or Lauren, you want to talk a little bit about kind of our thinking on why this might be a good time for the council not to do some planning in this particular plan on Lower Snake Dam removal?
Yeah, Fred, I might ask you to
Okay,
take that one.
I'll start by saying, I think we don't have a formal position on this, but of
Right.
course we're very deeply involved. I think our view is that the council should have a role in assessing the energy side of the Lower Snake issue. The question is when and how, and the practical issue here is the politics. As I mentioned, the council is a creature of the states. The states have very different views on this issue, and there are very different views within each state on the issue. That in the fifth plan, the sixth plan, that would be, the period around 2008 to 2011. The council did do some analysis of the potential for Lower Snake Dam removal, And there's a long story behind it that I won't go into. The final version of the 6th plan doesn't have most of the analysis they did, and I'll leave it at that. In the 7th plan, they did not address this issue directly. And in the current plan, which is the 8th plan, but they're calling the 2021 plan, also does not directly address this. I think the practical reality is until the states direct the council to review that, they aren't going to do any analysis. Now, as I said, going back to my first point, at some point, I mean, the coalition is very strongly in favor of a full review of the situation with the lower snake. We have long been in favor, broadly speaking, of dam removal. We published a report in 2018. If you haven't seen it, it's on our website. Quite good, a technical analysis showing that clean energy replacement for the lower snake dam, hydropower, generation and, ancillary services is quite possible and quite affordable. We think it's gotten even more affordable since then. We have a deep stake in this issue, but the issue of how to get the council to move forward and to do so in a way that gets a fair assessment, that's a tricky one. And so I think, Lauren and Nancy can talk about this. I think our view is it's probably better that this plan does not go directly to that issue.
Yeah, and I would add, I mean, that doesn't stop it from coming up at the public comment hearings for sure. At the Montana hearing, there were a number of co-ops that weighed in on this issue in particular, even though it's not actually in the plan. So yeah, definitely part of the narrative.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just add to what Lauren and Fred said that, there's the council isn't really set up right now to have the right assumptions to go into that analysis. So that's why we are a little cautious about demanding that they do an analysis at this point, because we're just not confident in what the assumptions would be going in. We also see some limitations in the current council planning models that give us pause to do such important work at this point. We feel like the council's about to embark on a kind of on a redo to improve the way their modeling works, which could also benefit this analysis. So there's pros and cons.
Just knowing we have some hands raised as well as chat questions.
Okay, I actually, let me see, hang on. Oh, on the participant side. I told you to raise your hand and then I couldn't see it. Okay, Arvia, you have a question also in the chat around energy efficiency. If you want to unmute yourself, go ahead.
Hi, yes, thanks for this great presentation. Yeah, I have 3 questions in the chat actually, but I think I will go ahead with the energy efficiency one. Why is there a decrease in the modeling? Is this have all the low-hanging fruit like changing light bulbs been used? That has increased energy efficiency a great deal, especially we've seen that in Seattle. Where are the biggest opportunities with efficiency going forward, and how much do they cost? How much electricity can we avoid using due to efficiency in a cost-effective way? And
great questions. Yeah, and I will maybe start this and then pass it off to Fred. So we're certainly seeing, that some of those quote unquote low-hanging fruit measures, which have, supported utility energy efficiency programs over several decades, are not showing up anymore. They're basically the opportunity, the opportunity has been exhausted. I think light bulbs are a really easy example to point to, and now that we've got low cost LEDs available at every single big box store, right, it's hard to kind of the lighting segment of energy efficiency in particular has that opportunity has sort of evaporated. I would say the other thing that's happening in the models, which is kind of getting back to what Nancy was talking about, is that we don't think the models really know how to grapple with the value of energy efficiency in a high renewables penetration grid. So essentially what's happening is that they're pitting energy efficiency against renewables in a way that doesn't actually result in an optimized selection of both, but instead kind of results in a zero-sum trade-off between, you know, low-cost renewables available on the market versus energy efficiency, which has a whole lot of other benefits and reasons for doing it, which aren't necessarily captured by the model. So that, I think, kind of gets at one of our biggest concerns is that framing that, well, you know, be careful what you wish for. Cheap renewables are, you know, now making energy efficiency less cost effective and less relevant. And that is simply, you know, we think the wrong direction that the plan should go in. It should be looking at, okay, well, what do we need to do to actually value energy efficiency properly in a high renewables penetration grid? So Fred, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one thing I would say, we can go a long discussion about this because of course the coalition was in part founded on the idea that, and the Power Act has a priority order for resources and energy efficiency, or in Act lingo, conservation is the first resource. It should be. And we have always advocated that it would become the most important resource, you know, the foundation for our effort. And in fact, that has happened. We have the council updates its numbers every so often, just issued a new release saying over 7,200 megawatts of conservation or energy efficiency has been achieved in the Northwest, most of it in the last 15 years or so. A lot was done before that, but a lot more since then. And it has become the second largest resource in the region behind hydropower. Does that mean we're tapped out? You know, hydropower kind of is. The answer is definitely not. There's a lot more. Some of it's quite expensive, but very valuable. A lot of it is still quite cheap, even though, and the council has two committees, and these are the ones I'm not directly involved with. The Regional Technical Forum, which examines all the resources and measures and bundles and so forth, a very technical way, in the Conservation Resource Advisory Committee, which it looks at the higher level. Both of those committees have phenomenal amounts of data and analysis to look on. It's really the authoritative source for the question of how much is there out there, how much will it cost if you get more of it, and what's the, you know, that kind of approach. The difficulty we're running into is that, as Lauren said, the models are not fully reflecting that value right now. So I think that's probably enough to say.
Well, and I would say, oh, I'm sorry, because you did have another question here about the opportunity going forward and sort of the potential for the region. You know, we're seeing a lot of opportunity in high efficiency electric heat pumps, particularly as we start to see climate impacts, you know, increasing demand for cooling in the summer. You know, those high efficiency heat pumps are going to be important. We're also pointing to the adoption by Washington and Oregon of the demand response capable water heaters, which, you know, are not reflected in what the council is recommending here, but they are actually, you know, available, and really we should be trying to get them deployed as much as we can. And then for the potential and the target, you know, the recommendation that we've been sticking with and that we're encouraging our allies and members to stick with is that, you know, that 1,000 average megawatt number, which is the high end of the council's target, really should be a floor, and that the target needs to be at least 1,000 in order to kind of maintain current budgets and momentum going into this really critical time.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up, which is, do those models somewhere, like does Europe have better models?
State has the nuclear power plants.
Brad, do you want to talk about models?
Sorry, I missed part of it. We had somebody who's not on mute. We're getting a little bleed
She
through.
was asking about better models.
Like if we wrote in, said use better models to account for energy efficiency and come back with a modified plan, would they be able to do it?
Practically speaking, not at this point. We're really talking a lot about what happens after this plan is finalized, and there, for a variety of reasons, the modeling needs to be reviewed and revamped. They're already upgrading one of the key models they have, but the challenge of a decarbonized grid is you can't, the assumptions of the models currently are you're going to have a lot of thermal power plants that have a lot of capability. They're also expensive and not very, there are other drawbacks to them. As we have fewer and fewer thermal plants, we have to have multiple resource categories working together. And this is the underlying issue, that if we can get better models, and there are lots of research going on in how to do that, and assemble a better, we've talked, and you can go look at our website, and we had some discussion a couple of years ago about our concept of a harmonious grid. Think like an orchestra or whatever, where each section plays its part and everything comes together to create the overall music. That's the same thing we're thinking about. The models don't really do that right now. I mean, there are some aspects of it, but we clearly need that, and a refresh on the models, big complicated software programs with lots and lots of details in them. It will take a while to do, but there are research efforts going on around the country that would help feed into that. But in order to get this plan done, the council's probably, the council, I think, will not consider backing up and restarting at this point.
Okay.
This is Jim. If I could just say something about the models. I did just some context here. First of all, when you read the plan, when they refer to customers, the customers they refer to are not citizens. They are referring to the public utilities as the customers. So that's who this is written and directed towards, to give guidance to them. And they had the input. When it said customer input, the customers that got input from to date have been on the energy side, public utilities, and absolutely other stakeholders. NWEC's been there, absolutely others, but a lot of predominantly, a lot of the airtime has been from utilities themselves, who are by nature not very innovative. The problem I have with the model and people relying on it too much, and is a concern I have, is can the model as taken be used by these more forward-thinking entities like the city of Seattle, like the state of Washington, like people who are looking into the potential for removal of Snake River Dam? Can the inputs or can portions of the existing model be used to inform that? The way that the mission of this whole thing is created is to really inform utilities what utilities should be doing to meet what they think the future might be. It's not to create a future. It's not to help inform a vision of the future. That's kind of our job, but I would love to see a model that helps us do that. Us, forward-thinking cities, forward-thinking states, and so on. So I think it's really important to really press them on, creating a model that is used and useful.
Two things, if I might. One is just to note that we're getting close to the hour, but we're going to stay on for those who want to go on and keep and go through all the questions and any more that you may have. The other is the Power Act is a little confusing on this point. It talks a lot about customers, meaning customers of the Bonneville Power Administration, but the Power Act also has very direct language about consumers, which is all of us who pay power bills, customers. So there is actually legally, I think in the act, there's a good distinction there, but sometimes the language kind of gets a little blurry.
I wanted to turn to a question that Bryce has about whether we think the council should weigh in on grid modernization capabilities and how they play into the regional energy issues and perhaps evolving markets. Does the plan comment on that? Does it, should it?
What do you think about that, Fred?
Well, hey, Bryce, thanks for a good leading question. I think we would turn to you for more on this, but yes, absolutely. We will be supporting your efforts with Grid Forward to promote that idea. It didn't get very much attention in the draft plan. And yet, from the perspective of how the grid actually runs and where the opportunities are, it's a really important topic. So I welcome you to go further on that. And of course, if you might want to post a organizational link there for further info.
Yeah. And for other folks, just so you know, Grid Forward is doing some great work in this space. And we're happy to have them as an ally in this process.
And Andrew, if you're still on, you had your hand raised before. You have a question about loss of load probability. If you want to unmute yourself, ask your comment directly, or I'll give Lauren and Fred a minute to read your question.
Hi, Nancy. Yeah, sure. I'll try and summarize. I just noticed there was a great article that came out in Billings Gazette, I think at the last week or so, about concern about the profile from, about the latest plan from energy providers here. And it just caught me as kind of, there was a disconnect between how they seem to approach the suggestions in this plan versus how heavily they quoted the loss of load profile statistics from the last plan as justification for build out of natural gas and coal. So, I think one of the arguments, obviously, politics are going to politic, but, what are the arguments about methodology changes, or, are they pretty consistent between the plans? I'm just thinking, it's frustrating to see, them quote a plan so heavily and then see the numbers change and say, oh, we can't trust this. Wonder if there's any comments there.
We'll take a quick swing at it. This is a topic of deep interest. It's part of resource adequacy, meaning, do you have enough power for every hour of the year, to meet demand? And the council has really got a lot of expertise on this. John Fazio, who's their key person, the staff person, former chair of the IEEE, the Electrical Society's LOLP working group. And, but I will say, and, so they really have a really deep view of this. They have a model called Genesis, which is the factor resource adequacy model. It's quite flexible for lots of purposes, but that's the main reason for it. One thing that's come out of there, and that they do an annual resource adequacy assessment, which they're in the middle of doing right now. It contributes to the plan, but it's not directly part of the plan. And one of the things that's come out of that process is the council takes an approach in that annual RA assessment of looking at what the system looks like, 5 years down the line, 3 years down the line, whatever, with the existing system plus committed new resources, including the energy efficiency targets in the plan and anything else that's basically under construction. Well, but what that leaves out is the resources that are pretty, not, steel in the ground yet, but are pretty committed by utilities in their IRPs and their RFPs, their actual solicitations. So we've gotten them to now, I think they will now start doing a scenario or a sensitivity that looks at that. The importance of this is if you look out 3 or 4 years, what we have now plus energy efficiency that's, in the targets is not enough to meet the gap when the coal retires. And yet the utilities that are retiring that coal are obviously building new resources to cover it. So that has created a kind of a perception gap here where the council's analysis said, a couple of years ago, we had a 25% loss of load probability, but you had to look at the footnote, which basically says, all things, business as usual, not including the resources that were obviously coming forward. In fact, the resource adequacy of this region is pretty good, although there's a lot of attention to it right now, and I think rightly a lot of effort being made by the utilities to address that. So just wanted to clarify that, because you hear people basically saying the sky's falling, the lights are going out, but that's not actually the case.
Yeah, and I would add, this is playing out in utility integrated resource plans and in a couple different ways in the region as well. We are seeing some kind of utility skepticism of the new Genesis and sort of, can we actually trust what changes were made on this? We don't know, we need to get more comfortable with it, that kind of thing. But I agree, it's kind of confusing because the message is that, well, we updated our resource adequacy assessment and turns out we don't have as big of an RA problem as we thought we did a couple of years ago. But that's just what you would expect. That's the kind of analysis that you would expect to happen and updates to the models that the council does on a regular basis and should be doing. So.
You mentioned, Lauren, in your summary that the council is not providing a preferred scenario. Should we be calling for one?
Well, I would encourage some thinking about calling for an expanded decarbonization scenario in the plan. The decarbonization pathways work was sort of unfinished in this plan, where the council staff, put a lot of work into this over the winter, and kind of when it was taken to the power committee this spring, there was a point at which they could have said, this is great, we want to work on this, right? Like, we want this to help inform the resource strategy and the plan. But that's not what they did. They basically just kind of tabled it, and it shows up as a scenario in the plan, but the findings and the resource strategy, the elements of what could have been the resource strategy out of that decarbonization pathways work did not actually make their way into the resource strategy decisions for the plan. So yes, I think particularly in the Washington and Oregon context, the decarbonization pathways work provides a better outcome than what we're seeing and what the council is calling the resource strategy here. But I would also note that they aren't really saying this is the preferred portfolio or the preferred resource strategy for the region. They've sort of punted on it a little bit. So Fred, I don't know if there's more.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. We're in a kind of transitional period. The last 15 years since Washington passed I-937 to set the RPS, then Oregon did ours. And Montana's had one as well, that was a big focus of what is state policy and how do you fold it into the plan, because those are targets that you could identify pretty directly. The new era that we're in has state targets for emissions or for clean energy, and how do you portray that in the plan? And the fact is, we're trying to find a more flexible approach to reaching those targets. We kind of have to, and that means a more of a scenario-based or pathway-based approach that should be driving the modeling and the plan outcomes. So that's something we're all wrestling with. Where do we go from here? After this plan is done, and we don't think there should be, we want the council staff and members to take a little break after they adopt a plan, but we want them to get busy right away with the next phase, and that will be a big focus.
So there's another question about the cost effectiveness metrics for optimizing greenhouse gas reductions and providing storage and clean energy. And are we satisfied with the cost effectiveness metrics that the council is using? And perhaps this is one of the things we want upgraded in the next round, or in the decarbonization path, they did a better job of using metrics, more diverse metrics. So if you could comment on that.
So if I might, two things. First,
Please.
The council has really done probably globally leading work to take climate models and use a downscaling approach, working very closely with climate modeling scientists to look at what the climate impacts are in the region, not just going forward, but also historically. It turns out there is a kind of a signal in there that we are seeing climate impacts in the region, both on, for example, hydropower and also other renewables, but even more importantly on demand. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the council's plan doesn't include effectively a kind of carbon price or social cost of carbon. It's a little complicated to explain the details, but it's built into this plan. It's not a scenario or an alternative. So those two things are in place. The question is, where do you go for valuing the resources that we want to add into the system, and then looking at different pathways. There's a lot more work to be done there. The models, have difficulty with these issues, but I think that council has been trying to do the right thing. But we have, there needs, more ground needs to be covered to really get to where we need to be.
Yeah, and I would maybe frame it in a slightly different way, if this is helpful for people, is, what the council has put forward is not the type of analysis that we would see in like a deep decarbonization pathways approach. So, there's been a number of those studies throughout the region that look at sort of, how do you most cost effectively decarbonize the economy? That is not what this plan is or does. And so it's kind of, I think the outcome is different because the goals are different. So I just want to flag that for folks that maybe are more familiar with the deep decarbonization pathways work.
So I believe we have gotten through all the questions. There were some discussion about nuclear and small modular reactors as to whether those are needed for reliability. And I think Lee did a good job of kind of laying out the concerns there in her response in the chat. I'll open it up. If you want to unmute yourself, if we haven't gotten to your question, or if you're not able to do the unmute and want to put it in chat, and any final questions. And as was stated earlier, we're going to post all of this on our website, make the recording available, the slides available that have some key points in it, so that you can be ready for the public hearing tomorrow.
So hello, I have a quick question if you're hearing me okay.
Yep.
So I'm in Montana and I've been investigating green hydrogen a little bit, and I just wonder if you have any thoughts about whether or not green hydrogen can play a role in decarbonizing in a decarbonized portfolio in the future. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I'll give a crack at this. I mean, it's certainly not really discussed in any detail or depth in the power plan. I think there is maybe a mention of, the regions should look at green hydrogen. From our perspective, I think there is some potential there, particularly for like heavy industry applications, energy storage. But we do think that green, it's very important that when we're talking about green hydrogen, we're talking about hydrogen that comes from clean energy resources. So, renewable based electrolysis generation, I think, is how we would be looking at the definition of green, but it's influx. I think it's an active debate and discussion amongst folks involved in the hydrogen space right now, and we do find ourselves sometimes in the position of trying to explain that we think green hydrogen means from renewable energy resources through an electrolytic process.
Yeah, thank you.
And I would just add that it's a little longer term resource, right? It's not competitive at the moment using the green renewable electrolysis that Lauren mentioned. And so we certainly want to watch it. We want to see where it goes, because we see some opportunities there for further development to add that to the resource mix. Any other questions? I want to thank everyone for participating. Thank you, Lauren and Fred and Kat for putting this webinar together. And you have Lauren and Fred's email up on the screen there. If you have further questions, we will be, as we say, developing more detailed comments and letters, and encourage you to actively participate in the public hearing process. So thank you so much for your participation today.
And don't hesitate to reach out if you have any further questions. Thank you.